Hello and welcome to the MIT Open Documentary Lab talk. Today it's my great pleasure to introduce Jessica Clarke. Unfortunately, Kamal Sinclair could not be with us, but Jessica is the founder and executive director of the media strategy, production, and forecasting firm Dot Connector Studio. She's also the publisher and co-founder of Immerse News and a co-author of the Making a New Reality Toolkit. Jessica is truly a leading expert in media. So many foundations turn to her for her advice and to write really influential reports. She's written many on topics ranging from journalism to futurism, emerging media, sustainability, social impact, and equity. Today, she's going to talk about her work with the Guild of Future Architects, a project called the News Project, which looks at sustainability and equity. And it's actually launching tomorrow, and we're getting a sneak peek today, and she's also going to workshop some of her ideas with us. So before I turn it over to Jessica, just a reminder to put your questions in the Q&A. We will have some time at the end of her talk to ask questions. So without further ado, Jessica Clarke.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And I have to send out a special thanks to everyone at the lab, Sarah, William, Kat, Claudia. It's been a real home for me over the years, and especially this past year when having virtual homes superseded having physical homes. So I'm based here in Philly, but you know, part of my brain's there in Boston.
Absolutely.
So because Kamal was unfortunately unable to join us, she's my partner in crime, my thought partner. I'm going to be winging some of this presentation, and it's totally new. So if I stumble or if things don't make sense, you know, give me some latitude and hopefully we'll all get through this together. I'm going to share my screen. And the other thing about this is that this new news project, which I'm going to be telling you about, is an experiment in and of itself. So we'll try it out, see how it goes. I'm going to hit play. All right, so you might be wondering, what is a Guild of Future Architects? Well, I'll tell you a little bit, and we have some future architects on the chat, so feel free to fill in the blanks. Sarah and Kat, who are here, are also future architects. It's a pretty new organization. It's been around about 18 months. You can check the link that Claudia just put up. It's a membership organization. It's also a refuge, especially in the pandemic, as I said, for people who are collaboratively shaping a kind, just, inclusive, and prosperous world. So it's not people who want to be architects in the future. It's people who are architecting the future. And it's got a long-term view. So trying to take a page from some previous guilds from years past, think about how to really elevate the craft of future architecture into a discipline that people can share, claim, refine, to help raise humanity's consciousness, try to reflect and encourage the diversity of our societies, and trying to be value focused around equity. There are 3 pillars to the Guild's long-term impact strategy. So democratizing imagination, which should be a familiar concept for those of you who have been following the work of the lab and of Kat William on collective and Sarah on collective wisdom, to really be able to open up the potential for many, many people to imagine how the society should function and serve us, and not just have the elite running the show, to create more opportunities, and to always center culture, the role of culture in this work. So here's some of the design principles for the Guild. The focus is on individual action for collective benefit. So the Guild members are individuals, but there's a lot, which I'll tell you about momentarily, around ways that we can work together to move out of reaction and into evolution, to develop trust as currency. So the Guild has been growing, they say, at the speed of trust. The New News Project is funded by the Ford Foundation. Like I said, we're launching it tomorrow. So we'll see what it is. In the past 3 months, we've been going through a design process to try to basically understand how this could be an incubator, could be a lab, could be, I don't know, a series of happenings, how this thing could fit in with the Guild's larger purpose and structure. So we're asking ourselves, who's acting like a future architect in the news space already? How can GoFA play a unique role in what is already a clamoring conversation around how to reinvent or save the news to advance diverse leaders? How can our value-driven focus really drive the project? And how can we avoid just trying to fix legacy news like so many people have been trying to do for the last 20 years and reimagine the power relations and the realities, not just that the realities of news today, but the way that news shapes what we think reality is and how it works. A lot of this is a very evidence-driven initiative. So I'm going to tell you about a couple of reports that are relevant to the founding of the New News Initiative. And Claudia's putting links in the chat. Thank you, Claudia. So this report we were originally supposed to release early last year, and then the pandemic happened and everything changed, and we had to go do new interviews, but we learned a lot around how women, Black, Indigenous people, and people of color in newsrooms, LGBTQIA journalists are navigating a very biased and sometimes hostile news environment, and the ways in which they're innovating on a shoestring, especially in the pandemic moment, to create new forms of news outlets and news products that serve their communities and engage with people in new ways. The older forms of print and broadcast journalism have really been failing for a number of reasons. Of course, there are economic reasons and technological reasons, but also because people don't trust them and they don't feel served by them. So we see this positioning of people who have been shut out of these news conversations or who had to encounter harassment and bias as an opportunity to reinvent. The New News Initiative is also shaped by this project, which many of you may have seen because it's been around. We've been evolving it, Kamal and I, over the last 5 years. It's called the Making a New Reality, and last year we released the Making a New Reality Toolkit, also with support from the Ford Foundation. So every week it seems like there's some new platform we're supposed to be experimenting with as documentary filmmakers or journalists or social activists. The latest thing is Elon Musk and his brain-controlled monkey. I mean, it just all the time there's something. But underneath all of that fervor and innovation, there are the same dynamics that we've seen in traditional media. The same people who have been at the top of the mastheads or have been given grants and funds are telling these stories. That means that the stories are not going to help us deal with the problems that we're all facing as a society, from climate change to racial injustice to you name it. So we need to crack this open. We need to acknowledge how homogenous the technology and media landscape is. And we need to make changes at a personal level, at an organizational level, and a systems level. So we'll be taking the insights from these two reports and a little bit of research that we're going to release soon that we've done into labs and incubators and accelerators into this process with us of defining the New News Initiative and how it works. This is an interesting little bit of research that my associate Mark Glazier worked on to look at the sort of intersection of incubators and accelerators in 3 areas. Journalism, of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and futurism. And we do see that there is a gap and that this New News project is going to fill it. So doing all this work and mounting up the Guild and trying to make these arguments was already complicated and hard and disruptive. And then the pandemic happened. And we really see the pandemic as a moment we don't want to rush to return to normal. We don't think normal was great. We don't even think it was normal. We see it as a stress test for systems, including journalism. And it gives us a moment, not necessarily a welcome moment, but one we're trying to leverage of be able to pause and see how the systems that we've been operating in are broken, and to stop trying to treat the symptoms for the good of humanity, not to be grandiose, but we're having some problems. So in part, we think the solution to this is co-creation, and Kat and William and Sarah, who are on here, have beautifully articulated both the methods for and the need for co-creation and collaboration in emerging media. And you'll see as this presentation evolves that this theme comes back again and again. So back to the Guild. What is it? What is that thing again? Okay, so it does three things. It brings people together, not just members, but people who are stakeholders, funders, investors, activists who care about these same things that we do. It creates this lexicon of future architecture, which allows people who have been doing work across many disciplines to recognize themselves as similar. Whether you're working in transportation or journalism or healthcare, you might be a future architect. You might be trying to work your way towards an imagined goal that would be better. And you don't necessarily know that you're doing that or that you have the tools. We're trying to show that to you. And then in the same vein, to cultivate that community and that community of practice and that visibility of practice. So as I said, we've got members. The Guild also advances a concept called shared futures. So we'll talk a little more about it in a little bit, but basically a shared future is like a startup with a social impact mission and a collective structure. And one of the things we're going to be doing with the new news initiative is supporting shared futures in journalism. And then this is still a twinkle in our eye, but we're working on the collective wisdom platform, which is going to be a place where future architects can share their visions, they can connect with one another, they can analyze related data, etc. So stay tuned. Okay, so how does the new news initiative fit into all of this? We want to explicitly bring journalists in or take our ideas and concepts out into the journalism ecosystem. I'm going to be doing a lot of thinking out loud on the Guild's website, on the Guild's Medium site, which I think I have the link to, but Claudia, if not, I can put it in there later. So you can sort of follow along as this develops. This year, we're going to try to figure out how to articulate what shared futures are in journalism and how we could help shared futures that are existing or nascent. And then we're gonna figure out what the collective wisdom platform is, and we're gonna put stuff on it. So this is all happening in the larger context of this membership organization, which we're hoping will hit 1,000 members over 3 years. And it's really a fascinating set of people who are operating across many disciplines and passions and motivations. There's an annual report on the Guild's website if you want to learn more. One of the core things that we think we have to offer the journalism field are these learning programs, and they're really unusual. I've been in the news innovation space for 20 years, and these programs are different because they basically invite people to come and imagine what their work could do, how it could change the world, and to write narratives around it, to write fiction, to create artifacts. So that's the starting point, and then the people are asked to then understand what's the narrative around the area they're trying to affect, where are the resources and the resources aligned against them, what are the rules, what are the policies, formal and informal, and to do some self-examination, both in terms of their own practice for maintaining sanity and health in this complicated, volatile environment, and for the group. To how are they going to work with one another? And then finally, what are they actually doing? So we're gonna test this out from within this year to help kick the tires on the learning programs and see how journalists who are sometimes kind of cynical and impatient might feel about these learning programs. We're going to bring multidisciplinary advisors in because the journalists have been talking to each other quite a bit, and the documentary filmmakers have been talking to each other quite a bit. We want to bring in some new understandings and expertise. We're trying to take this slow despite how fast I'm talking. I put up a thing that says pause and breathe on my wall to remind me of this. And because it's been a really hard year and everybody's been traumatized by so many things, we have a focus on rejuvenation and discovery. All right, we're circling back around to the shared future concept. So what does this mean? Well, we all know what a startup is, and we all know what a nonprofit is. The problem is that that doesn't really describe all the possibilities. We've seen a lot of different types of business models and collaborations and hybrid things over the years that don't easily fit into these categories, and they don't really express the social mission of lots of things that many of us on this call have worked on. So a shared future is an attempt to try to come up with a name for those things that don't fit in those other buckets, and that has a more flexible and imaginative construction. So shared futures, they're not trying to get bought out. They're not trying to exit to the market. They're trying to serve the commons. They have a hybrid funding streams. They have a community model instead of a business model. So the ways that people support them might include volunteering or collaboration or serving as editors or as writers or whatever it is that might normally be funded by either a grant or by ad or subscription revenue in the journalism space. And they're led with collaboration, not competition. So they're not necessarily positioning themselves in the marketplace head to head with other types of organizations. They're trying to see how they can work together, how they can fit in, how an ecosystem approach might help. And this mirrors the discussions around business models in news. For example, there's this organization of people who call themselves zebras who are trying to figure out how you can get investors who have a mission focus and shared and patient capital and are interested in how to exit to community as opposed to exiting to the market. There are many other types of organizations, types of conversations like this around B Corps and other social impact investing. So this is in that family. And you can see over here on the left, it's also not a model where the shared future gets bigger and scales up. This is kind of a flaw in the system of funding and investing. There's room for discovery and growth. The focus is on values alignment and stakeholder engagement. So you know you're succeeding when everybody feels like this is going to lead to the shared future you've been talking about. Oh, it's as big as it can get. Are you not? Sorry, I'm just responding to the chat. But you can go to the Guild's website and these graphics are on there. So the link is farther up in the chat, no problem. Anyway, so yeah, so we're entering in at the incubation phase, but then the idea is that there's this fractal that happens. So it could become scalable, it could become portable. So it could be that you could replicate your construct in a lot of different places. It'll be up to the community to respond to this shared future and figure out what comes next. So here's an example, in case you're wondering what all that jargon meant. We just had a call with the Guild around Immerse, which has been co-produced by several people who are here on this chat, on this Zoom call. So currently it's co-produced by Open Documentary Lab and Doc Connector Studio, which is my company. Originally, when we launched it 5 years ago, it was with Ingrid Kopp, who is still involved, but she was at the Tribeca Film Institute then, and the Fledgling Fund, which is our primary funder then. We've been evolving it over time. So there's this, you can see there's this hybrid combination of individuals and institutions. It went from being anchored at a nonprofit organization to now it's anchored in a for-profit organization with a fiscal sponsor. More recently, we brought Abby Sun, who's a fellow at the lab and is here. Hi, Abby. On as the editor. I was the editor. I backed away to publisher, and we transitioned it more formally to an editorial collective. And we don't know how it's going to evolve. It might turn into something else. It started out as a listserv, it became a publication, we've got a newsletter. So this is an example of the type of thing that is out there and that we're hoping to support in the news space. All right, so just to recap, prototyping this concept of the incubator and shared and journalists as future architects this year. We want to activate our network. That means all of you and everybody you know, so please spread the word. We're hoping to kind of pre-incubate a couple of projects by guild members this year. Early next year, we're hoping to really open up the incubator for people to apply or to be selected. We haven't quite figured out the process. And to start to build the funding and stakeholder community around this concept. And then in 2023, we would see how that worked, report out on it in real time, refine the programs and the incubator further, attract further resources, and try to graduate some of the shared futures that had been incubated in the previous year. So check with me in a year, maybe we will have done that. This is based on something that happened last year. They had an incubator for shared futures, which ranged from IF Africa, which is about creating a futurism think tank in Africa, to a project that's on how to build collective health resources in communities so that people don't have to just rely on doctors, to this interesting multi-platform and interactive presentation and piece of media around what we can learn from the way that stars respond to one another. So really interesting set of projects that got incubated and are currently growing and attracting attention. So we're hoping the same thing will happen with the New News Initiative. That was a lot. A lot of jargon, a lot of new concepts. So I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to pause and breathe and see what questions you have.
Thank you, Jessica. All the panelists, you can come back online. That was really interesting. You know, it's such a complex being that's trying to do all these things. So it's great to see, and thank you. Any of the panelists, do you have some initial comments or questions? No.
Sarah, do you want to talk a little bit about the ways in which our work has intersected and how your lab might have spawned or mirror this concept?
Yeah, I mean, I saw a lot of synergies, you know, especially with the, you know, this idea of bringing people together and cultivating them, and really, you know, it's definitely, we're about a future, you know, and taking technology and making sure that it's, you know, who's working with this technology, storytellers, humanists, you know, and trying to create a community around that. And collaboration, of course, co-creation. Kat has her hand up. You know, it's so fundamental to how we think, and we've always thought about sort of how you bring these different communities together and how what we do at the lab can go back out. You know, and sort of collaboration with, you know, Tribeca or other festivals to sort of take what we do, but then partner with other groups who, you know, maybe have other expertise. I remember when we started the lab, you know, we wanted to look at this new ways of telling stories, but then also how are we going to reach people? And so we reached out to Tribeca and Sundance to work together. And it's all about that connection and collaboration. And future, and sort of the interdisciplinarity of it, which I think is so great about the Guild of Future Architects, how they're really reaching out to other fields and bringing them in. And it's something we really try to do. So a lot of things, and Immerse was about that too, like trying to cultivate a community and bring people together online and from different fields. And equity is also something I think that we've really, you know, made strides to think about how we can, you know, who's incubating, who's telling these stories, who's experimenting and influencing the future of technology. So, Kat.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Yeah, congratulations. This is really exciting. Yeah, and I'm just curious, you mapped out a sort of a map, a road, a guide for the next year or two. And I'm curious if you could just expand on that a little bit. Like, what do you envision as those first steps that you'll take?
So part of what we're doing right now, and what I could use the help of this group on, is we're trying to translate all of this into concepts that people can grasp and recognize. So that's an endeavor. So I started a case making document to try to pull together some of what I've just presented here, and to try to show, both for journalists and for people who are outside of journalism and are not in the same kind of like conversation that I'm in all the day, like, what do we mean by shared futures in journalism? It's not just about people who are trying to make new kinds of outlets or products. It's about the way in which people who are working together to make the world better in new ways, right? So we're looking at projects that have a social justice focus and are inventing, because there's plenty of great outlets already out there that are led by women, people of color, et cetera, that need money, and we know that, we acknowledge that, but that's not what this is about. You know, this is about some of these new processes, new realities, new platforms that I mentioned. So making the case to the field, doing that by going to all of the sort of the circuit, which has changed quite a bit because we're not in person anymore, but this year's version of the circuit of the Online News Association or Newsgeist or, you know, Sundance, or the places where people really care about the evolution of journalism and nonfiction media, and trying to, you know, meet people, talk to people. Also trying to bring the community in by doing interviews with folks that we think are representative of the types of projects and approaches that we want to elevate. And then finding that we don't know exactly who yet, but finding a couple of people in the guild who are kind of have these nascent types of projects, so that we can get their feedback on the learning programs and on the concept. So we've named it the New News Project, New News Initiative. There's something else called the News Project. It's intentionally vague, and it's intentionally not focused on deficit-based identities. You know, it's not about equity. It's not about bringing people up to speed. It's not about like pointing out inequality. It's about we need new news. And we think that the people that are going to make things that are actually going to work, you know, are going to be people who have not been doing it previously. So how do we bring that frame to bear in the conversation?
Kelly, you have a question.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I had a couple of quick questions. One was about the role of kind of policy and public funding, both how you see like public financial support, and also how you see your work intersecting with like policy focused work, as that count as one of the things that could be incubated. And then also, are the things that are incubated, do they need to kind of come with their own funding, or are you providing any kind of like financial support? Or I'm so intrigued by this, your business model or non-business model.
Yeah, the things that, okay, let me address the policy question first. So I've been working in the policy space on these questions for a long time, at least a decade. And there are a couple of, they come in a couple of different directions. So one is the long-standing debate around whether to fund public media and how, and what it consists of. So I did a lot of work in 2008 through 2013 around that question, and how do you redefine public media for a digital participatory space and era. So that's one. There's a parallel conversation around how do we fund digital news, and is it infrastructure, is it community based, is it through national policies, or through the FCC? And that's actually being taken up by Congress people and advanced So we're definitely keeping an eye on those projects. They wouldn't necessarily be incubated by this because the focus here is on collectives of people who are working together to make things for publics, for audiences. And we don't know what their business models are yet. That's part of the problem. Like a lot of us in the journalism, arts, and documentary space, there are many people who have great intentions and excellent skills, and they're very smart in making their media. They don't know how to pay for it. They don't know what a business model is, you know. So part of what we want to do is really kind of short circuit the space between the learning curve. We want to say, like, look, there's all this stuff. We have a million business models. I have this deck of cards I created. It's got business models in it around media strategy. We've got, you know, reports upon reports. The challenge is not to relitigate how to support journalism. The challenge is that there's not enough money, that hedge funds have come in and hollowed out the legacy newspapers, that the existing business models have collapsed even further in the pandemic, and that we need new approaches, and we need to be able to show audiences that those new approaches are relevant to them and viable, and to attach funding streams to them in creative ways. So we're not coming in with a, you should be, like, there's lots of things that say now news should be nonprofit. We're not making that claim. We're like, we think being sustainable is good and people should be paid. And if they're not paid, then they should be compensated by participating in something that's really amazing. And they should feel like a soul connection to it. And if they don't, then they're not going to support it. And that's the problem, right? So how are we going to solve that?
Great. Josh.
Thank you so much. This was such an inspiring talk. And I mean, it's great to hear about how the sort of incubator space is creating new knowledge about journalism, as well as, I guess, you know, encouraging or inspiring just new forms of journalistic practice. I guess I'm curious, I mean, I know you mentioned that sort of a lot of aspects of the project are sort of, you know, in formation, or, you know, it's sort of yet to be determined. I'm curious if you could speak maybe a little bit more about the relationship to legacy journalism a little bit more. I mean, I can imagine that, you know, some of the folks that are going to be, you know, collaborating or co-creating might then kind of go back into their, you know, newspapers or media organizations and kind of bring what they've been working on, you know, back into that space. So, you know, reform or rejuvenation, reinvigoration could be one route, but perhaps there, you know, there could be sort of new imagined roads, you know, perhaps leading away from some of these legacy outlets and you know, business as usual. So yeah, I'm just sort of curious to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, so it's not explicitly aimed at institutions. What we see in the field is that people will be activated. Sometimes they live inside of those institutions, like a public broadcasting station or a newspaper. Sometimes they're floating. Sometimes they're in like a digital network of other people who care about the same things. And so we have we have entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs in the mix. I have found in many years of trying to reform various organizations that that's not the way to go. But it's great if we can infuse new energy, talent, and ideas into those organizations, because they have the reach and the capacity that these you know, the sort of struggling independents don't have. So part of the magic of this is just pulling the circuits together. Like, one of the things I like best, and why I made that deck of cards I was just showing you, is it's a strategy for basically laying out the game, the playing field. And that playing field might involve you know, different sources of support, which might include in-kind support from those larger organizations that are employing people who are really leading the charge to be more representative or more participatory or address misinformation. That's the other thing. The challenge changes over time. So for a long time, I was advocating for engaged journalism. That was from the perspective of existing gatekeepers who were not talking to their communities. Well, those gatekeepers, they ran out of money. They started laying people off. That was no longer the point of intervention. The point of intervention, oh, I forgot to mention earlier. So the other piece of policy work that's associated with this is the entire arena of reform policy around large technology companies that are shaping our public sphere. So misinformation and artificial intelligence have been at the cusp of the problem that we're trying to solve over the last year or two. Well, since 2016, I won't mention why. So the problem changed, the interventions change, but we see that diversity and inclusion and invention continue to be under-resourced, no matter what the problem space is. And that's part of why you have an incubator, is you ask, like, what's the deal this year? What are we worried about? Last year was the election coverage. This year might be, oh, the census, for example, or, you know, the pandemic. And so having a flexible structure to address, you know, that ball of issues over time is part of what we're hoping to achieve.
All right, great. Cindy.
Hey there, Jessica. Super interesting to hear about what GoFA's been up to. So I have both comments and questions. So I am working in the space of where journalism meets tech. And what we find is, what I find personally as an artist and someone who's been at the Open Doc Lab and someone who is now interacting with, or has interacted with, journalists and news media ecosystems, is the two don't often meet. So the people who have a vested interest in DE&I and inclusion are not usually the ones who have any interest in getting, or the ability to get that news, that new information out there. So what we found is the people that we've rolled out our DE&I programs to, the ones who can benefit from it will engage. The ones who do not benefit from it, who don't see how they benefit from it, do not engage. So therefore, we still have a siloed problem.
Right.
And I think it's super important as you go forward to think about how different wording and even just framing of what the problem is and how you might want to fix it will help get access to those people who have the ability, but they may not see what's in it for them.
Right. No, I totally agree. We do some of that case making around the business case for inclusion in the Ford report that I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been through several generations of like language massaging on this as part of what the public media language is about. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's definitely, I think we're at a unique moment, because when we started some of this research around, when we began with the Ford Foundation project, it was a question of how do you resource innovation for equity, and we looked at festivals and labs. And at that time, the sort of leading issues were around the Me Too moment in journalism, which took down a lot of highly visible male executives and hosts. And then, you know, over the last year, it's been more around racial reckoning, which has been another entire conversation in journalism. So I think that those very public shamings and questionings of like major media brands have softened the ground a little bit for this type of work in a way that wasn't true, you know, in 2018 or in previous years. It doesn't mean that those people are going to listen necessarily, but they are being called upon by their boards and their stakeholders and their audiences and by public conscience to articulate their responses to these questions.
Yes, and I think my follow-up question or comment would be, you know, they're going to be those people, those heads of companies that are not going to do it because they don't care. But identifying the people who do care, like, you know, we're partnering with a couple of different companies and a hospital and a few colleges, and it's really, how much do people really want to do the work? You know, like, do they want to hear what the stories are really? And if so, then once they hear them, they kind of have to be compelled to act.
So part of why we're doing this too, it's a coalition of the willing strategy. Like, if you don't want to play, don't come. You know, we want to work with people who are inspired and excited, but also the futurism angle cracks open some people that might not otherwise be interested in having yet another sort of HR style conversation around bias. You know, people feel, very white people especially, and men feel very defensive in this moment, and they don't necessarily want to be confronted with another one of these sort of lectures. But if they're invited in to do a fun thing and imagine a future and write a story with some people and bring their own expertise to the table and feel catalyzed by the visions of the people they're in that room with and challenged, it's more fun for me because I've had those other conversations 100,000 times, and it's more fun for them. And it also creates these sort of magical moments where it's like, oh, I never thought of it that way. And it's not in the guise of blame. It's in the guise of, oh, like, what if the Martians did land and then suddenly our shared humanity was what mattered, not the fact that we are all these different colors, or, and we actually, the Guild, I worked on the report with the Guild, I'll put in the chat, that really demonstrates this approach. Kat was also part of those conversations. I'm putting it in the chat. Here we go. It's called Portals, and it basically offers these different inroads to like visions of futures around what if shared well-being became the standard of success for our nation? What if we shifted from extraction to regeneration as an ethos? What if we moved from an era of destabilizing information, which I was just talking about, into an age of pluralistic and trusted wisdom? And how can we dismantle silos between work, home, education, play, and community? And each one of these has a fictional story, an artifact from that story, a sort of a quiz about things you think may or may not be possible, a set of trends, an understanding of the historical background of the problem, and a imagination about what the future, how the future could be. So those are many different, learning styles, communication styles, imagination styles that open people up in different ways.
Good to hear it. Thank you.
Thanks
Right,
for your
we have
question.
a couple questions here in the Q&A from Pakanam Amur. You say that you will open up the incubator, Jessica, next year. What do you envision would be the role of new participants, and what are you looking for in participants?
So we're trying to, in the same vein, we're trying to create a bunch of invitations for people to participate in this work that are not necessarily inside the incubator. Sessions at workshops, sessions at conferences, who knows? We'll see what happens the next year. But theoretically, the incubator would be pretty small. I don't know, maybe 5 shared futures, which would mean that the people who are in it are made up of teams. There might be a lead individual, but it's not individual focused. Although we do understand that people who are in these incubators have talent that travels. So it's not that we want to necessarily end up with a final product. What we want to do is lead participants through a process of considering a product that they can then take with them as inspiration to whatever it is they do next. Because we can see leaders going from project to project and organization to organization. And we don't have the criteria yet, so I can't answer the rest of your question. Hopefully that was not so general that it didn't mean anything. And then I see Ivan's question too.
Yeah, Ivan asks, hi, Jessica, hope you're well. I'm still a bit unclear as to who your primary audience for this work is. Is this mostly focused on the US, for example? Is it mostly makers, creators? And actually, I had a question around that too, around, are the members US based? Are the models that you're looking at US based? Are the collaborations US based? What's the focus?
Nope, they don't have to be US based. The portfolio that funded this project is domestic, but the Guild's membership and obviously the issues in the journalism environment are global, as Ivan knows well. And we haven't put any strictures on it. There are multiple audiences for this initiative. So researchers and makers like the ones who are on this webinar. funders who are either already funding journalism and looking for new inspiration, or are in their communities or in their issue focus, and they want to understand how journalism might bring people together, teach them more, activate them, engage them around those issues or communities. Also, like I said, there are circuits. So the journalism reform circuit, the journalism innovation circuit, the documentary innovation circuit, the technology reform circuit, those are all sort of overlapping sets of people. And we've kind of mapped out those circuits too with Immerse, which is highly interdisciplinary and kind of like wanders from network to network. And it's kind of, it's not a very good answer, but it's kind of a, it when you see it. Like my husband will say, oh, you met one of your people, because suddenly you're like, you're sitting there debating what's going on with Facebook, or suddenly you're all agreeing that you really wish that NPR spoke in a different voice, or, so it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be vocation based. It's a type of person who cares about these issues. So, it's a pretty arcane thing. It took me a long time to explain, so it's not for everybody, but it is for some people, and we know them when we see them.
I think the challenge too of trying to describe this all is you're not just, trying to fix broken things. You're really starting from scratch and opening it up and really trying to create a space for imagination and imagining, what's not there. I had a question about you said something that the GoFA is growing at the speed of trust. What does that mean, and how do you go about implementing that?
It means that you don't rush to add people, that you don't rush to, like, the GoFA team is small and multifaceted and working on many different problems, so you don't rush to like force new members into the team, for the team to process. You try to get to know people, try to build, try to look at the overall composition of the guild members, so that it's not all, everybody from one continent, or everyone from one discipline, or everybody from one, perspective or demographic. And so that's a deliberate process, which is a little bit maddening for people who are wondering, like, how can I be a guild of, a future architect? But because it's got a 100-year mandate, we have to keep reminding ourselves, like, breathe and pause, don't freak out. We know the world feels really hard right now, and we hope that this can help, but we can't just, stick people together and into a room and hope that that'll work. You have to think about it.
100-year mandate. Who set that mandate?
Sharon.
So beyond her own years. Interesting.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions or comments? And again, from the attendees, if you have anything, put it in the Q&A.
There's some in the chat.
Oh, there's some in the chat. Okay, let me go there. Chat. I see one right in front of me. How do you see the role of BIPOC-focused and BIPOC-led organizations and people, journalists, doc folks, with respect to your end goals in contrast with others for whom the angle of entry is different? Is there a distinction?
Well, there's definitely a distinction. There's intersectionality, right? There are going to be people whose angle of entry includes more privilege. Like, as a woman, I have I've encountered a certain amount of harassment and bias in journalism. Not as much as some people who get death threats every day. But, if I were a woman of color, that would be amplified, and it would be nearly unbearable. And working with Farai, the Ford's journalism program officer, and with Kamal, both of whom are women of color, I know that I can't fully understand that, and I can't fully articulate what that means. So we're going to be taking those issues into consideration. definitely, when we're thinking about inclusion in journalism. But also, we don't necessarily, this isn't, what's complicated and interesting and difficult about this is not a particular demographic that we're angling it to. It's people who have been historically excluded or have faced bias, who face structural challenges in either getting their news products and project up off the ground or in reporting on and for and with the communities that they serve. That doesn't always look the same, and are they actually bringing a new approach to the table? Because like I said, there's lots of perfectly good and respectable and worthwhile projects with these goals out there already that need money, but that's not what this is doing in particular. So yeah, we don't know. In the same way that we don't know exactly what answers people are going to be coming up with, we don't exactly know who they're going to be, but we do believe that lived experience and all of the structural and demographic and other biases that I've named previously, they shape people and we want to see how that plays out in this initiative.
We just had a wonderful talk right before with Joanna about the role of, thinking about disability and access around disability issues and how we have to think differently from the beginning in the work that we do. And I know you're not talking about specific projects, but is there anything in GoFA that is looking at that, or in the portals report? Curious.
Yeah,
in that area.
It definitely has come up. There are definitely members who are focused on different types of, disabilities, whether those are visible or invisible. And I think, part of what we saw that was really fascinating during the pandemic was that people who had to fight really hard for affordances that would allow them to work from home or to work remotely or to worry about the ways in which their health was threatened by being in proximity to other people. Those folks were poised to innovate for this moment. Again, it's about moving out of a frame of, serving the vulnerable, et cetera, and valuing what people's lives and experiences have brought to the table in terms of new approaches and fresh perspectives. So curb cuts is what people usually bring up in this sort of talk, where the things that allow you to wheel your wheelchair up a sidewalk. Well, that helps bicyclists, that helps people with strollers, that helps that type of approach, that type of design thinking where you begin with the most vulnerable and then you work your way out. We've covered this a bit in Immerse. Leads to, perspectives and inventions that might not otherwise have happened. Like another quick example, I worked on a project with the Internet Archive, which was all around using closed captioning to analyze political ads because they're not transcribed as part of a program transcription. There was no other way to get at that data because political ads are broadcast differently in different regions around the US. But the closed captioning, which was invented for people who don't hear well, suddenly became data, like really rich, amazing data around an issue of public policy. So yeah, we're looking for leaps of understanding like that.
All right, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Jessica, for that really inspiring talk. And we look forward to seeing how the news project develops. I guess, as you said, it's launching tomorrow. And thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to the attendees for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you next week, and goodbye.